just in time.
Wait for a couple stragglers. See anybody else out there?
Did you go careful with
None of them.
Okay. Talking about AJAX tonight, it's essentially asynchronous JavaScript XML. It was a technology developed by Microsoft, but the rest of the industry has taken over. But it's a technology that allows you to send requests to servers and then do other things, and then when the request is ready, you have a listener, and it essentially does what you tell the listener to do with the response from the server. So, the way you go about doing this is you would first create a response content. The reason you do that is because when you work with, servers and transferring information back and forth, you want to have a standard that you work towards rather than just, oh yeah, it's going to look like this, it's going to look like that. You want to start with a standard, start with a format. Then the next thing you do is you create an XML HTTP request object. And then after you do that, then what you do is you assign the ready state change method, which is essentially the listener for the event when the response returns. Excuse me. Then in the response, the program that returns a response, it returns a header telling what kind of information it is, content, type. And then I'll talk a little bit more about the details of the responses, because they're different based on whether you're working with text response or an XML response. Text responses are kind of nice if you want to just throw a bunch of HTML up on the screen. Varies based on, say, you push this button and say HTML shows up, and then push this other button and it does this other stuff. You could just do use this inner HTML attribute of the DOM object. So anyway, go through here. This is the way I designed my XML for what I wanted to show to you. I don't know if you're all familiar with XML, but it's a formatted standard that's similar to HTML. They all come from the basic thing. But to be useful, it has to be well formed. This doesn't show it here, but when I did this in industry, we had a definition up in here. Was actually a reference to where the definition was, and it would validate that this document was accurate inside of itself. So that the program that would send it, or the program that would receive it, would receive this definition as the first section of the document, and then it would validate it against the content. It's pretty handy if you're doing transferring. I was transferring invoices and purchase orders across the internet to large corporations and stuff. So anyway, so here you have the root of the document, and I create an address book. This whole thing would be an address book, and then I have a set of clients, one client, and then the client's ID, name, first name, middle name, last name. And if you wanted multiple clients, you just create multiple instances of this here. So then the next question you want to ask is which HTML HTTP request object should you use. If you want to use IE7, Firefox, Chrome, Opera, Safari, you use this method. If you want to use Microsoft to use this method, you've probably seen the ActiveX things before. So what you do is you try to figure out what type of browser you're in. In my function here, create request, first I initialize the request, then I analyze, does it have an object, HTTP request object in the window DOM. If it does, then I create the request using the HTTP request object, which is pretty much the standard way that most browsers do it. However, if I can't do that, then I come over here and I see, does it have a ActiveX object? If it does, then I create the request using the Microsoft standard ActiveX object here. So, and then my function will return the, oh, that's much better. Return the request, the HTTP request object. Now, when we make a request for a HTTP request, in my example here, this method allows you to, I took this part out, but it allows you to send a URL that's it's in here in the parameters. You have a synchronous, asynchronous definition here, and then you have the ID of where you want the content of the request to go. In this case, I put it to a div. So then what you do is you take, right here I'm creating an object that will be the element by the ID number, by the ID, same thing as here. Then I create the HTTP request object using the function you saw previously. And then if that's not, doesn't return a valid object, then I throw this exception. If it goes on, then what I do is I assign the ready state, on ready state change attribute to this response listener method that I'll create later on. So this is the object here. This is the attribute that you assign your listening function to here. Then after you have assigned the listener, then what you do is you open the request. In this case, it's a GET request. There's all kinds of requests you can do. You can do GET, POST, others I can't think of right offhand. But I did happen to look at the W3C website, and they showed an example of where you can use this method to ping a machine if you wanted to, which I thought was interesting. Then after you open the request, you have to tell it that you're done, and that would be by sending it a null. If it was a post, you would send it the content of the post in here. Now here, I created a text response event listener. So when the response comes back from the server, this listener will test to see if this ready state of this HTTP request object is 4, or it goes 1, I sent a request, 2, I forget the others, but 4 means that the request has been received and sent back a response. In the case of here, the prefix this refers to the HTTP request object because we're inside of a listening method, so that this would be the object itself. That really confused me. So here we have the response, and we assign its inner. I'm sorry. The response is the part of the HTML document, and in the side of its inner HTML of that div that I set up, I assign the response text of this for the HTTP request object. I'll show you when this happens. Okay. In XML, you do it differently, a little bit differently. Again, you have a response listener, and you check the state of it, then you check its status. This is common header status, 200 means everything's good, okay. Here, if I don't find that status, I throw the exception. Then I take the response of the HTTP request as an XML DOM, document object model. And what I do is I assign that to this variable here. And then I have a function that I use that variable to parse out that XML that you saw previously into usable data and place it where I want it to be. Here's an example of the parsing. I don't know if any of you are familiar with parsing XML in JavaScript. No? Okay. I'll explain it a little bit. The first thing you do is you you have to get the root of it. If you recall, in the XML I showed you previously, it had a root, which is the very first tag. Okay. The way you do that is you use the document element attribute of the XML document object model. Then what I like to do is I like to create an array of all these tags. If you recall, I had the word client. So here I created an array of all the things with the tag name client. Okay. So each element of, each item in the array would be one client. And if you recall, the one client had multiple tags underneath it, like ID, first name, last name, middle name. So what I do is I go inside, this would be one client. So a client's sub I is assigned up here, starting with 0. It would have, that would be the client itself, the client tag itself. To get to the actual content of the tag, you use the first child, which is 0, and then it's a text node. So then you use the text content attribute to give you the value of the ID here. And you do the same thing on down through the first name, middle name, last name, like that. And then what I do is I assign all those variables to a line. I like to use this little way of doing my if statements. It's kind of something I picked up from being a C programmer, but anyway, basically just puts in first, middle, last, and ID. And then oh yeah, okay. Here, what I'm doing is inside the document, HTML document, I create a text node with the content of this line here. And I assign it to, I like to put small O's in the front of all of my variables that are objects. That way I don't forget. And A's in front of my arrays, kind of a thing I've always done. So I create a text node. Then I need to create an element inside of my document. In this case, I'm using a list, an unordered list. So the element that I use would be the LI, or the tag, same thing as what you would see in the HTML, would be the tag for a UL, which would be LI. And then I assign that to a object of line. Okay. Then what I do is I take that line and I append it to the child of the, I should say list here, I have that. No, I take that back. I appended the text to the line. So you've got the LI, and then you have the content of the LI. So here's the content, and there's the LI, and then I append the content to the line. Okay. After I've done that, I actually have an LI and a text, which is called a line. In this instance, I call a line object. And then what I do is I use the append child method to append this line object to my list object. Anybody have any questions? All right. Getting you confused? Okay. That's it. Questions? I'll show you examples unless you have questions.
Back up one, where was oldest? Where did that come from?
The what?
The very last, you did oldest equals,
Oh,
or append child. Where did
let's
oldest?
see if I can figure out how to get back.
You got the, yeah, by order.
Yeah, the last statement.
Oh, here? What I do is I set it up as a global variable that I assign
Okay.
when the whole thing starts. I go, let's see here, previous one. I'm not sure I show it here. I guess I don't. But in my code itself, I create a variable in the global area that I call list, and then inside of my where I make the request, I use the get element by ID for the list, and then that gives me an object to that list in the document.
So that corresponds to essentially the on-screen list of clients?
Yeah, it'd be the
Okay.
HTML.
Okay.
Yeah. So what you can do is dynamically you can create your HTML inside your program based on whatever you want it to be based on. This is the technology that Google uses extensively because it allows screens to work like we're used to terminals or PCs, where we don't have to deal with stateless environments like the internet. But using AJAX technology, the user would think it's a stateful existence because you can change things on the screen without refreshing the whole screen. The old technology is that you say create a web page on the server. You're on the client side. You make a request to the server, it creates the web page in the script, and then boom, it sends the whole web page out. Well, this technology allows you to send pieces out.
Or just individual things.
Yeah.
Like their chat client is maybe.
I'm sorry?
Their chat client is kind of like.
Well,
I like it more. You go to sites where you're doing like searching for car models. You get a drop-down list of make.
yep.
And when you pick a make, it then does AJAX behind the scenes to populate the next drop-down of the models based on the make that you built.
Yeah.
At our company, we had this is one of the first things I did when I started, is we had a problem where this horribly designed interface would would search the entire database and create a selection list of every person in our database. And it would take, how long was it, John?
Oh,
30
ridiculous.
minutes?
It was, yeah, well, that wasn't that bad, but the thing is, it was like 10,000 names. You know, a pull down of 10,000 names, I mean, how
Great.
insane, you know? Who would ever want to page through? Yeah.
So anyway, what I did was, I used these AJAX technology where the user's typing in, as they type in a letter, it makes requests. So as you type in closer and closer to the name you want, the list gets smaller, or
So
more
that's what,
focused.
like Google's using for their search engine.
Yes.
When you're typing things, it's automatically figuring out what you're, I'm kind of going, wow, that's pretty nice.
Yes.
Yeah, what's impressive is how fast it's going off its servers,
Right.
generating a new list while you're
And
typing.
it's almost like immediate.
That's
Yes.
because the amount of information it's sending is such a small amount. You know, the amount it's returning is such a small amount. If you look inside of the, you can use a debugger and you can look inside of Google
So all
Chrome.
those are containers then, right?
I'm sorry?
They're containers?
Like they're just, you know, like in a web page, you have the header of the page, you know, tells you where the addresses are and what the response is, a response or request, that kind of stuff. It has just a small amount of information in there, and then in the case, I'll show you in a few minutes, you just have a little bit of text, which is essentially the URL of where it's to go. And so you really don't send much out as far as the request goes. You know, if you have a get parameter, you put that on the URL. But the information sent is relatively small, and the information you receive back is relatively small. You saw that list that I showed you in XML. It's really a small amount of information compared to a big HTML page. You know what I mean? So if you have to send a HTML page that's, I don't know how large in size, but it's probably a factor of 100 times larger than the information you would do using this technology. I just finished a class on this from UW, Wisconsin, and one thing that teacher told us is some people have a tendency to use this for everything. So it's like overkill, you know. Some things are very simple and shouldn't be done this way, but this is a very effective way to speed things up. For example, data entry, and you want to have a list populated quickly of what they're entering, you know. So this works really well. Next thing I'll do, I'll show you some examples. Okay, here's an example of where I make a request, but here's to a file. See, I'm using a file here. I just make a request to a file that's stored on my machine. So here's the div where it's going to return like that. See how fast that was? Didn't flash the screen or anything. And so this is essentially just a list of that XML definition that I showed you, where the root, the address book, the clients, the client, and then the content of the client here. So, do you like my names? Jimmy Page, Frank Zappa. Okay, so anyway, you can view that. Well, let's do this. Okay. So here I just go to the HTML first. There's my body and my, I'm sorry, it wasn't a div. Yeah, it is a div. Here's my response block. I just create a div here. And then what happens is dynamically it inserts, in this case I'm using the inner HTML attribute of the div to insert it inside of this. So as I press the button, that's it. That's what shows up. So if we look at the, let's see if I can get to that. Let's see what's going on. Bear with me a second here. It's not letting me. Go further out. There we go. Here's the generated HTML. See that? That's that.
So that's the dynamic stuff that's coming from.
Yeah, that's what the HTML you see on the screen there, that's what is generated there, that content there. So you can see I have my, where is it?
I did that.
There's my response block right here, the div. And then what I do is I use, of course, the inner HTML, and what it does is it just brings it all into that, and that's what this list looks like. So anyway, that's the file example. Used to more real estate, I guess. I might say that these tools that I have for my Firefox, they're very nice. I really like them. All these tools up here are very handy. And I love this debugger. I don't know if you've ever used it's what's it called? I forget. Firebug. Yeah.
Firebug, yeah.
I love it. But if you want to, I could go through a debug example of what it did. If you want to see that, or move on. Okay.
Did those tools all come from the same, is that one toolbar you got someplace, or you just added those tools?
They all
ad
came
hoc?
from the Firefox add-ons website.
Okay.
So this tools thing is a separate thing from this. I use them both. I don't know if you've used Google Chrome, but it has a programmer tools piece that's really handy.
I use a Firefox tool called Web Developer, and it's
Okay.
got a whole list of
Things
stuff
like that.
like that. Yeah. You
Yeah.
can- on your forms, you can convert posts to gets and stuff like that.
Oh, okay. The thing I really like about this one, they use a lot, is this disable cache. And that's just so, because when you program, you refresh and think, oh, okay, it didn't work. How come it didn't work?
Yeah.
It's because the cache, So I always disable my cache. And it is kind of nice, because you can do cookies and such. and it's also nice because you can look at all this stuff, stack levels of the blocks and such. There's a lot more out there, I'm sure. But it has a nice feature where you can tell it validate the HTML page for me. Validates it against the standard, gives you all the error messages and all the warnings and stuff. Because sometimes the thing won't render correctly and you can't figure out why, and it's because it's invalid HTML, so it goes into, I can't remember the word, but it's a mode where it just throws it up the best. Port mode, thank you. Just puts it in puts it up however the browser feels like it, you know. Every browser would be different. So, anyway, that's the example of the file. Now I'll show you the example of the server. Where is it? That's not it. Okay, what's it called? Okay, here we go, stream example. So this is an example where instead of requesting a file, I request a stream. And the stream that I'm requesting in this case is a PHP script that I wrote that returns XML stream.
Could it be a video stream too?
I'm sorry?
Could it be a video stream or audio stream?
Yeah. XML has those capabilities, yes. I don't know how it works exactly, but somehow they send XML data and it converts it into video or audio or whatever. Okay, so in this case, I'm going to get my address book again, but it's going to return as XML. There it is. I created a list again. I like lists. So, just like that. And it's all through those methods and functions that I showed you before. Here's a source for it. Here's the address book that I have here. This is the UL. And you asked about the list. It's the global variable right here.
Okay.
And this response I have is a global variable as well. I don't think I have to have that be global if I recall the way I wrote this. So anyway, when when the user clicks on the button that says Get Address Book, it executes this on click event, which executes this method, sending it the URL here, localhost get address book PHP. In this case, I'm not sending anything back to the server except just the URL. I don't have any parameters on there. If I did, I would just attach them on here, like you do any time with get parameters. With post, the method of using the post, I didn't give it. I don't have it in this presentation, but you can go to W3C Schools, which is a really good place for tutorials on this stuff, and also W3C website has some good examples as well. So you click the event, and it does this using the URL, synchronous, and the ID. And what here I do is I get the, using the ID I'm passing in, I get the response object, and then I get the list object, address book, and then, excuse me, I call my create request function, I should say method, and I assign it to that request object. If that doesn't work, I throw a exception. Then here I take the request object and here's the ready state change attribute, which you assign it to be the name of a function or a method, depending on what terminology you use. But this essentially is the listener that listens for the event. So, and then at that point, you just take the request, and in this case, I open it as a get, like you would in a form, a get, passing it the URL and the asynchronous. It defaults to asynchronous to be false. Yeah, I believe so. If you don't put that in there. Now here, again, I'm creating the request, and I use this methodology to say, is this Microsoft browser, or is this the other kind of browsers we have? Just do that so that, I didn't do that initially when I wrote my program at ABACAP, and I didn't think it mattered because we always use Firefox, but lo and behold, somebody on the outside wanted to use nothing browser, so I had to do that. But anyhow, that's how you do that. And then
Isn't that affected from that one list you had? Would that effectively be just Internet Explorer 6? Because you said 7 plus was.
Well, it would use the ActiveX control, I believe.
Right.
I don't know it that well.
Right, but on your list of ones that you used, the exception one was Internet Explorer 7 plus
Yeah.
was on the good list.
Yeah.
So
Essentially, Microsoft.
really,
got
are
away
we
from-
really talking about Internet Explorer 6 or older, I
Yeah.
suppose?
I think Microsoft got rid of ActiveX control. I don't know Microsoft at all. Does anybody know that? What Microsoft does? I don't know about 7. I don't know how it works. When I used to program in Microsoft, we use ActiveX controls all the time.
Oh, they got rid of it?
I'm sorry.
They got rid of it?
I don't know. That's why I asked.
I think they're around. They're just a lot more limited.
Okay. 'Cause that was one of the biggest security holes, Somebody
Yeah.
sends you an ActiveX control and it will reformat your hard drive.
Yeah, like now in order to run it, it brings up error, messages where you have to agree to it.
Right. Okay. So, that. Okay, so we make the request. We should, okay. And then here's the listener. I check to see, is the request completed? If it is, I check the status of the request. Is it good? Okay. If it is, then I take the response XML attribute, which is essentially an XML document object model, and I assign it to this variable, and then I parse that out. I think we talked about that already, parsing it. I'll show you the code here. I put the remove lines in here so I didn't keep making the list larger. But here you get the root element, then you create the array of the tags in the client, and then you just go through the children and get the text content. If you looked at the, for example, this right here, it would be a tag of client. If you look at this, it would be the text inside the client. You have a question?
No.
Okay. So, I think we've talked about all that. Any questions about parsing XML? Okay. I might mention, this is a very memory-intensive, very slow process of using XML. This is where all of the XML is loaded into this big document object model for XML, and it's all in memory. So if you had to million lines, you can imagine the amount of information being there. But when I worked for Bell, I used a method that would parse XML using events. So every time it hit a certain tag, it would fire off an event, and then you would have this thing in your program where it would execute that event. And that's far more effective and it's faster and doesn't use much memory.
It's only on the server, right? Not on the client.
No, you can do it on the client.
It's
I was
here's the
doing it-
client side that's parsing the XML.
Yeah. I don't believe that JavaScript has an event-driven XML parser, but Java does, I know, because that's the one I used to use. So if you use Java on the client, it would, you could use that method. I think that would require an applet in the browser, if I recall. If you did a stand, if you had actually wrote a program in Java, you could ignore the browser and do these requests back and forth. So, I think there was a push with people trying to do that, where they would ignore the browser, take the browser out of the equation, then you don't have to worry about which browser you're using and stuff. I think in industry they do that a lot. So, that's that. So that's what I have. Anybody have any questions? Okay.